I used to believe that love could bridge any gap that family meant acceptance, and that kindness would eventually win hearts. 2 years of marriage taught me how naive that was. There I sat at my husband's family barbecue, watching everyone laugh at his sister's cruel joke about my disappearance, and something inside me shifted. The woman who desperately sought their approval died that night. What emerged was someone they never expected. Someone who would take their challenge and turn it into my greatest victory. Before I share this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever felt invisible in your own family, and subscribe, because I promise this journey of reclaiming my worth will inspire you. Have you ever had someone challenge your importance only to prove them completely wrong? Let me tell you about the night I accepted their dare and changed my life forever. My name is Serenity, and at 28, I thought I had found my forever home in Blake's family. We had been together for 4 years, married for 2, and I genuinely believed that time and persistence would eventually earn me a place in their hearts. Blake worked as an account manager for a consulting firm in Chicago, while I coordinated marketing campaigns for a nonprofit organization downtown. We lived in a cozy apartment in Lincoln Park, and our life together felt solid, comfortable, real. Blake came from what most people would call a picture-perfect suburban family in Naperville, Illinois. His father, Robert, a retired engineer at 68, carried himself with quiet authority and spoke in measured sentences that somehow made you feel like you were being evaluated. His mother, Patricia, a former high school English teacher at 65, possessed that particular brand of Midwestern politeness that could slice you open while maintaining a sweet smile. Then, there was Madison, Blake's older sister at 32, who had built a successful real estate career selling luxury homes to Chicago executives. From the very beginning, I sensed an invisible barrier around Blake's family that I could never quite penetrate. During our dating years, I attributed their coolness to natural caution. Parents protecting their son, a sister being appropriately skeptical of the new girlfriend. I told myself that once we got married, once I proved my commitment and love for Blake, things would change. I was determined to be the daughter-in-law who won them over through sheer persistence and kindness. The early warning signs were subtle, but consistent. At family gatherings, conversations would flow naturally until I attempted to join them, then suddenly shift direction or lose momentum entirely. Madison had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, often saying things like, "Blake has never brought anyone home for Christmas before you?" in a tone that suggested this was somehow suspicious rather than special. Patricia frequently mentioned Blake's college girlfriend, Sarah, a pre-med student who had really understood the family dynamic and fit in so naturally with our traditions. What hurt most was Blake's consistent failure to defend me during these moments. When his mother would make pointed comments about modern women and their different priorities, he would change the subject rather than speak up. When Madison would exclude me from sister-in-law activities or family decision-making, he would shrug it off as just Madison being Madison. I began to feel like I was fighting for acceptance entirely alone, while my own husband remained a passive observer to my struggle. The gatherings became exercises in endurance. I would arrive hopeful, armed with homemade contributions to family meals and genuine enthusiasm for their stories and traditions. I would leave feeling drained, questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. Blake would always assure me that his family loved me, that I was imagining the tension that things would improve with time. By the summer of our second year of marriage, I had developed a thick skin around Blake's family, while maintaining hope that breakthrough moments were still possible. I had recently received a promotion at work to senior marketing coordinator, along with an exciting opportunity to relocate to our Denver office if I wanted a fresh challenge. The promotion filled me with confidence and optimism. Maybe this success would finally earn me some respect from Blake's family. Maybe they would see that I was accomplished, ambitious, worthy of their son. The July barbecue was Patricia's annual tradition, a Saturday afternoon gathering that brought together extended family, close family friends, and neighbors for an elaborate outdoor feast in their expansive Naperville backyard. I had attended 2 previous summer barbecues, each time hoping that this would be the event where I finally felt welcomed into their inner circle. This year felt different, though. I had good news to share about my promotion, and I was determined to approach the day with renewed confidence and positivity. I spent Friday evening preparing my contribution to the meal, a gourmet potato salad recipe I had perfected over months of trial and error. I wanted everything to be perfect. I selected a cheerful yellow sundress that Blake had complimented several times, arranged for a beautiful bouquet of flowers from Patricia's favorite florist, and even researched current events that might spark interesting conversation. I was armed with enthusiasm and hope, ready to show Blake's family the best version of myself. The Saturday morning of the barbecue arrived with typical Illinois summer heat, the kind of humid warmth that makes the air shimmer and sends people seeking shade by mid-afternoon. Blake and I drove the 45-minute journey to Naperville with classic rock playing softly on the radio and my carefully prepared potato salad chilling in a cooler in the back seat. I felt nervous excitement building in my chest as we pulled into the familiar driveway of Blake's childhood home. The house stood as an impressive testament to Robert's engineering career success, a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and the kind of outdoor entertainment space that magazines feature in summer hosting articles. By the time we arrived at 2 in the afternoon, the party was already in full swing. Children from various family branches ran through sprinkler systems, while adults clustered around beverage stations and appetizer tables scattered across the expansive deck and patio areas. Patricia greeted us at the sliding door that led from the house to the outdoor space, wearing a flowing floral dress and the kind of hostess smile that seemed both warm and somehow evaluative. She accepted my flower bouquet with appropriate enthusiasm, though I noticed her eyes quickly scanning my appearance in a way that made me suddenly second-guess my dress choice. Robert appeared moments later, offering Blake a firm handshake and me a polite nod that felt more like acknowledgement than welcome. The real shift in energy occurred when Madison arrived 30 minutes later with her new boyfriend Marcus, a corporate lawyer who drove a pristine BMW and carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove your worth to anyone. The family's reaction to Marcus was immediate and telling. Patricia practically glowed as she introduced him to relatives, highlighting his impressive career and Ivy League education. Robert engaged him in lengthy discussions about investment strategies and market trends. Extended family members sought out his opinions and laughed enthusiastically at his jokes. I watched this performance with growing understanding of how family acceptance was supposed to look. Marcus was embraced immediately, included naturally in conversations, treated as though his presence enhanced rather than disrupted the family dynamic. The contrast with my own experience was stark and painful. Here was proof that Blake's family was capable of welcoming new people warmly when they chose to do so. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated despite my efforts to participate meaningfully in family conversations. When I attempted to share news about my recent promotion, Patricia redirected the conversation to Madison's latest real estate success. When I offered to help with food preparation in the kitchen, I was politely but firmly told that everything was under control. When I tried to join discussions about family vacation planning, the subject mysteriously changed to inside jokes and shared memories that predated my relationship with Blake. Blake seemed oblivious to my growing discomfort, caught up in animated conversations with his cousins about fantasy football leagues and childhood escapades. He was in his element here, surrounded by people who had known him since birth, sharing the comfortable intimacy of lifelong relationships. I began to feel like an observer, studying a foreign culture rather than a participant in a family gathering. Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah, Patricia's siblings, who had driven down from Milwaukee for the barbecue, seemed particularly invested in making subtle comments about young wives these days and their different expectations from marriage. Their remarks were never direct enough to confront openly, but pointed enough to sting. They spoke about the importance of wives who understood family traditions and knew their proper place within established hierarchies. As evening approached and the heat began to subside slightly, Patricia announced that dinner would be served buffet-style on the deck. The elaborate spread included grilled meats, multiple salads, fresh corn on the cob, and an array of desserts that showcased Patricia's reputation as an excellent cook. My potato salad was included among the offerings, though I noticed it received little attention compared to Patricia's signature dishes. The seating arrangement for dinner felt deliberately orchestrated to emphasize my outsider status. Blake found himself at the center of the main table, surrounded by his parents, Madison, Marcus, and several cousins who had driven in from various Chicago suburbs. I ended up at the far end of an auxiliary table with some family friends and their teenage children physically separated from the core family conversations by several feet, and the general din of multiple simultaneous discussions. From my distant vantage point, I watched Madison regale the table with stories from her and Blake's childhood, emphasizing shared experiences and inside knowledge that excluded me entirely. She spoke about family vacations to Wisconsin lake houses, holiday traditions that stretched back generations, and embarrassing moments from Blake's teenage years that made everyone laugh knowingly. Marcus was seamlessly incorporated into these conversations, asked for his opinions, and treated as though his perspective mattered deeply to the family's collective wisdom. Patricia dominated much of the dinner conversation with discussions about family genealogy, updates on distant relatives, and plans for upcoming family reunions that would bring together Blake's extended clan from across the Midwest. These conversations reinforced the complex web of relationships and shared history that bound Blake's family together, while making it clear that I remained an outsider looking in. Every anecdote, every reference, every inside joke served as a reminder that I lacked the decades of shared experience that created real belonging in this family. Blake participated enthusiastically in these conversations without ever attempting to include me or explain references that went over my head. When Patricia mentioned the time we all got snowed in at the cabin, Blake launched into an animated retelling of a Christmas Eve adventure from his teenage years, complete with voices and dramatic gestures that had the table laughing loudly. I smiled politely and tried to look engaged, but inside I felt the familiar sting of exclusion. After dinner, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon and string lights illuminated the outdoor space with warm amber light, the family naturally gravitated toward the fire pit area at the far end of the patio. This was clearly a cherished tradition, as Patricia had arranged comfortable seating in a large circle around the stone fire pit, complete with side tables for drinks and blankets for when the evening air grew cooler. The alcohol had been flowing freely throughout the afternoon, and by evening time, inhibitions were noticeably lower and conversations more animated. Madison seemed particularly energized, holding court with stories from her real estate career, while Marcus played the role of admiring boyfriend to perfection. She had always possessed a natural charisma that drew people into her orbit, and tonight she was performing at her peak. I had attempted earlier in the evening to share news about my promotion and the opportunity it represented for both Blake and me. The Denver position would mean a significant salary increase and the chance to lead a major community outreach initiative that aligned perfectly with my career goals. However, every time I tried to steer conversation toward my professional achievements, someone would interrupt or change the subject entirely. Patricia had actually turned away mid-sentence when I mentioned the promotion, choosing instead to refill her wine glass and engage Marcus in discussion about Chicago's luxury real estate market. The fire pit conversations began innocuously enough, with Robert sharing updates about his golf league and Patricia discussing her book club's latest selection. Madison dominated much of the dialogue, describing recent successes with high-profile clients and the challenges of working in such a competitive market. Marcus contributed observations about legal aspects of real estate transactions, positioning himself as both knowledgeable and humble enough to defer to Madison's expertise. I sat quietly in my designated chair, nursing a glass of wine and trying to find natural openings to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. Blake was engaged in animated conversation with his cousins Jerry and Mike about their shared fantasy football league, their voices carrying easily across the circle, but somehow excluding me from their tight-knit dynamic. The conversation felt like watching a well-rehearsed play, where everyone knew their roles except me. As the evening progressed, someone mentioned the recent death of Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had lived across the street from the family for over 20 years. This sparked a philosophical discussion about the impact people have on the lives of others, and the lasting impressions we leave behind when we are gone. Patricia spoke eloquently about Mrs. Henderson's role in the neighborhood community, describing how she had welcomed new families, organized block parties, and created connections that enriched everyone's lives. Madison, perhaps, emboldened by the wine and the attention she had been receiving all evening, decided to expand this theme into a broader meditation on human significance and the ways people matter to those around them. She spoke about the importance of making meaningful connections and contributing something valuable to the family and community structures that sustain us all. Her words carried the weight of someone who felt confident in her own importance and place in the world. I finally saw an opportunity to contribute something substantial to this conversation. My work in nonprofit marketing had given me extensive experience with community outreach programs, and I had recently been involved in a project that connected isolated seniors with volunteer visitors. I began to share details about this work, describing how we had measured the program's impact and the heartwarming stories that had emerged from these intergenerational connections. However, as had happened repeatedly throughout the day, my attempt to participate was quickly redirected. Patricia interrupted to ask Marcus about his law firm's pro bono work, effectively shutting down my story mid-sentence. The conversation flowed naturally around Marcus's response, while my contribution was forgotten entirely. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but tried to maintain my composure and wait for another opportunity to engage. The turning point came when Madison, clearly feeling bold and perhaps enjoying her position as the evening's main entertainer, decided to focus her philosophical musings directly on the question of individual significance within family structures. She had been gesturing expansively with her wine glass, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your audience appreciates your performance. The setup was perfect for what followed, though I had no warning of the devastating turn the conversation was about to take. Madison paused dramatically in her monologue about human significance, scanning the circle with the satisfied expression of someone who knows they have captured their audience's complete attention. The fire pit cast dancing shadows across her face as she prepared to deliver what she clearly believed would be the evening's most memorable observation. Speaking of disappearing and leaving marks on people's lives, Madison began, her voice carrying a tone that should have warned me what was coming. She turned her gaze directly toward me with a smile that I initially interpreted as inclusive, as though she was finally ready to bring me into the conversation in a meaningful way. "Serenity," she continued, and I felt a flutter of hope that maybe this would be my moment of acceptance, my chance to finally connect with Blake's family on a deeper level. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." The words hit me like a physical blow, but what followed was infinitely worse than the statement itself. The silence lasted for perhaps 2 seconds, just long enough for Madison's words to register with everyone in the circle, and then the laughter erupted. It started with Madison's own delighted chuckle at her perceived cleverness, but quickly spread around the entire fire pit like a contagious disease. Patricia laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes, her whole body shaking with mirth at her daughter's brutal observation. Robert, typically reserved and measured in his responses, actually slapped his knee and let out a hearty guffaw that I had never heard from him before. Blake, my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, joined in the laughter without hesitation. His familiar laugh, which I had always found comforting and warm, now sounded like betrayal given voice. He was not just failing to defend me, he was actively participating in my humiliation. Marcus, still eager to ingratiate himself with his new girlfriend's family, jumped into the laughter with enthusiasm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort at the cruelty of the joke. Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah exchanged knowing looks as they chuckled, as though Madison had finally articulated something they had all been thinking but were too polite to say aloud. Even the cousins, who had been absorbed in their own conversations moments before, turned their attention to appreciate Madison's verbal assault. Jerry actually applauded, calling out, "Madison, you are savage," in a tone of genuine admiration. Mike nodded approvingly, adding, "She has a point, though," as his contribution to the collective cruelty. I sat frozen in my chair, feeling the heat of humiliation spread across my face and down my neck. My hands began trembling, and I gripped my wine glass tighter to stop the visible shaking. The laughter seemed to continue forever, feeding off itself as family members appreciated not just Madison's joke, but the shared understanding that they all agreed with her assessment of my significance in their lives. But something unexpected happened in that moment of complete devastation. Instead of collapsing into tears or fleeing in shame as they clearly expected, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The laughter continued around the fire pit, but it seemed to fade into background noise as a crystalline clarity filled my mind. Every slight, every exclusion, every passive-aggressive comment from the past 4 years suddenly made perfect sense. This was not about me failing to win their acceptance, despite my best efforts. This was about a family that had decided from the beginning that I would never belong, and who had spent years reinforcing that decision through subtle cruelty and deliberate exclusion. The woman who had arrived at this barbecue, hoping for breakthrough and acceptance, was dying in real time, replaced by someone who finally understood the situation with complete clarity. They wanted me gone. They had always wanted me gone. They had simply been too polite to say it directly until now. As the laughter began to subside slightly, Madison looked at me expectantly, clearly, anticipating tears or angry words or some other reaction that would confirm her power to wound me deeply. Her eyes sparkled with satisfaction at her successful performance, and she settled back in her chair with the contentment of someone who believes they have scored a decisive victory. Instead, I slowly raised my hand into the air, the gesture so unexpected and deliberate that the remaining laughter died completely. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of neighborhood evening activities. "Challenge accepted," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the emotional earthquake occurring inside me. Madison's confident expression faltered slightly, replaced by confusion, and perhaps the first hint of concern. "What do you mean?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was trying to maintain the light, joking atmosphere she had created. I stood up with deliberate grace, setting my wine glass on the side table with careful precision. Blake reached toward me with sudden alarm, apparently recognizing that something significant was happening beyond his sister's typical mean-spirited entertainment. "Honey, she was just kidding around," Blake said quickly, his voice carrying a note of panic that suggested he finally understood the gravity of what had just occurred. "You know, Madison, she did not mean anything by it." I looked down at my husband. This man, who had failed to defend me countless times, and who was now asking me to pretend that his sister's cruelty was harmless humor. The disappointment I felt toward him was almost as profound as the hurt caused by his family's rejection. "Am I asked, simply directing the question back to Madison, but letting my gaze encompass the entire circle of people who had found such joy in my humiliation. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the house, leaving behind the stunned silence of people who had expected a very different reaction to their collective cruelty. My mind was already racing ahead to the practical steps I would need to take that very night. I moved through Patricia's perfectly appointed kitchen and living room areas with newfound purpose, collecting my purse and the light cardigan I had brought in case the evening air grew cool. My movements felt deliberate and calm, as though I was executing a plan I had been preparing for months rather than making life-altering decisions in real time. Blake caught up with me as I reached our car in the driveway, his face flushed, and his words tumbling over each other in his rush to contain whatever damage he sensed was occurring. Serenity. Wait, please. Madison was drunk. She does not think before she speaks when she has been drinking. You cannot take what she said seriously. I unlocked the car door and slid into the driver's seat, leaving Blake standing in the driveway, looking bewildered and increasingly frantic. I am taking the car, I informed him simply. You can get a ride home with your family since they are so important to you. The drive back to our Lincoln Park apartment took 45 minutes in Saturday evening traffic, and I used every minute to plan my immediate next steps. By the time I pulled into our building's parking garage, I had a clear timeline for the evening ahead and a preliminary strategy for the weeks to follow. I packed systematically and efficiently, focusing on essentials while leaving behind anything that would require lengthy explanations or negotiations to retrieve. Clothing, toiletries. Important documents, my laptop, and a few sentimental items filled 2 large suitcases and a carry-on bag. I worked in focused silence occasionally, pausing to appreciate the strange sense of liberation that was growing stronger with each decision. Blake arrived home around 11:30, clearly having spent hours at his family's house trying to understand what had happened and probably being told that I was overreacting to harmless family humor. He found me in our bedroom, zipping the final suitcase, closed with calm efficiency. "What are you doing?" he asked, though the answer was obvious from the scene before him. "I am leaving," I replied, simply lifting the suitcase from our bed and setting it next to the others near the bedroom door. Because of what Madison said? Come on, Serenity, she was just being Madison. You know how she gets when she has been drinking. She did not mean it literally. Blake's voice carried the exasperated tone of someone who felt he was dealing with an unreasonable reaction to a minor incident. I sat on the edge of our bed and looked at the man I had married, really seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our 4-year relationship. He genuinely believed that his sister's public humiliation of me was a minor issue that I should simply overlook for the sake of family harmony. He could not understand why I would not just absorb this cruelty and continue pretending that everything was acceptable. "Blake," I said gently, "your sister said that if I disappeared, no one would notice. Your entire family laughed, including you. They were not laughing because it was absurd. They were laughing because they agreed with her." "That is not true," Blake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "We were all just, I do not know, caught up in the moment. Madison was trying to be funny." "When was the last time you defended me to your family?" I asked. "When was the last time you told your mother to stop comparing me to your ex-girlfriend? When was the last time you told Madison that her comments about me were inappropriate?" Blake opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to find examples that we both knew did not exist. His silence was more revealing than any words could have been. "They have made it clear that I do not belong in your family, and you have made it clear that you are fine with that," I continued. "Madison challenged me to disappear, and I am accepting her challenge. I want to see exactly how long it takes for anyone to notice I am gone." I stood up and gathered my belongings, heading toward the front door of our apartment, while Blake followed behind, making increasingly desperate arguments for why I should stay and work things out. He promised to talk to Madison to set better boundaries with his family, to be more supportive in future interactions. Each promise felt hollow, because it was coming only after I had reached my breaking point, rather than during the 4 years when his support might have made a difference. "Where are you going to go?" Blake asked as I loaded my suitcases into my car. "You will find out if and when I want you to," I replied, starting the engine and backing out of our parking space without looking back. I drove to a hotel near O'Hare Airport and checked in for what I told myself would be one night while I figured out my next steps. But even as I unpacked my few belongings in the generic hotel room, I knew this was the beginning of something much larger than a temporary separation. The promotion opportunity in Denver, which had seemed like an interesting possibility just hours earlier, now felt like a lifeline being offered at exactly the right moment. I spent Sunday morning on my laptop and phone setting in motion the practical changes that would support my new reality. I accepted the Denver position effective immediately and requested expedited relocation assistance. I changed my phone number and began the process of redirecting my mail to a post office box. I deactivated all my social media accounts and blocked every member of Blake's family from my email and professional networking profiles. By Monday morning, I was on a plane to Denver with a one-way ticket and a corporate apartment waiting for me. I had effectively vanished from Blake's world exactly as Madison had suggested, but on my own terms and for my own benefit, rather than as a victim of their collective cruelty. The weeks that followed blurred together in the best possible way. My new role involved developing community outreach strategies for underserved populations throughout Colorado, work that felt meaningful and utilized skills I had been developing throughout my nonprofit career. My colleagues welcomed me warmly and invited me to join hiking groups and weekend social activities that helped me build genuine friendships based on shared interests rather than family obligation. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and emotional abuse, and through our sessions, I began to understand the complex dynamics that had made Blake's family so resistant to accepting me. More importantly, I learned to recognize my own patterns of seeking approval from people who were determined to withhold it, and I developed healthier strategies for building relationships based on mutual respect. 3 months after leaving Chicago, I met David at a professional networking event for nonprofit organizations. He was a program director for a youth mentorship organization 6 years older than me, with kind eyes and the type of easy confidence that comes from knowing your own worth rather than needing others to validate it. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, and I felt more seen and appreciated in those 3 hours than I had in 4 years with Blake's family. David and I began dating slowly and thoughtfully, building a relationship based on genuine compatibility rather than desperate hope for acceptance. He introduced me to his family after 4 months, and I was amazed to discover what normal family dynamics actually looked like. His parents asked about my work with genuine interest, included me naturally in conversations, and treated me like a valued addition to family gatherings rather than an outsider to be tolerated. By the 6-month mark of my Denver life, I realized that entire days would pass without thinking about Blake or his family at all. I was building a life filled with meaningful work, authentic friendships, and a romantic relationship that enhanced, rather than diminished, my sense of self-worth. The woman who had sat around that fire pit accepting cruelty as the price of belonging felt like a character from someone else's story. It was around the 8-month mark when mutual friends from Chicago began reaching out carefully, probing for information about my whereabouts and willingness to communicate with Blake. Apparently, the divorce papers I had filed through my attorney had created considerable drama in Blake's family, who seemed shocked that I had followed through on my promise to disappear, rather than eventually returning to apologize for overreacting to Madison's harmless joke. According to these friends, Blake had spent months expecting me to come home once I cooled down and realized I was being unreasonable. When the divorce papers arrived, accompanied by a legal document outlining the division of our modest assets, the reality of my absence finally began to register. I was not hiding somewhere in Chicago, waiting for an apology. I was building an entirely new life that did not include any of them. The final piece of information that reached me through these careful inquiries was that Blake's family had begun to realize the practical void my departure had created in their lives. Apparently, I had been handling a surprising number of logistical details that kept Blake's life running smoothly, from managing our health insurance and coordinating with our accountant to maintaining relationships with service providers and organizing social obligations. In my absence, Blake was struggling to manage adult responsibilities he had never fully taken ownership of himself. More significantly, my professional skills had been quietly supporting Blake's career advancement through marketing materials I had created for his consulting work and networking connections I had facilitated through my nonprofit contacts. Without my behind-the-scenes contributions, his professional trajectory had stalled noticeably. Madison's relationship with Marcus had ended badly when he realized that her cruelty toward me was indicative of character flaws that would eventually be directed toward him as well. Patricia had apparently made several comments to family friends about missing my thoughtfulness and the positive energy I had brought to family gatherings, though she seemed unable to connect these feelings to her own role in driving me away. A full year after that devastating barbecue, I received the final piece of information that brought my transformation full circle. Blake had apparently spent considerable time and money trying to locate me, hiring a private investigator who eventually traced my move to Denver, but was instructed by my attorney that I had no interest in any contact from my former husband or his family. The investigator's report, according to my source, had included details about my professional success, my relationship with David, and the vibrant social life I had built in Colorado. Blake's family finally understood that I had not disappeared into misery and isolation, as they had perhaps expected, but had instead created the kind of life they had never thought I deserved. This was when the true irony of Madison's challenge became clear. She had suggested that my disappearance would go unnoticed. But in reality, my absence had created a void that affected every aspect of Blake's life and relationships. I was not the one who had been forgotten. I was the one who had moved forward into happiness, while they remained trapped in the consequences of their own cruelty. Standing in my Denver apartment, looking out at the Rocky Mountains, and planning a weekend hiking trip with David and my new friends, I felt profound gratitude for Madison's cruel joke. Her challenge had given me permission to stop fighting for acceptance from people who were determined to withhold it and to start building a life worthy of the woman I had always been capable of becoming. Sometimes, the most devastating moments in our lives are actually invitations to step into our power. Madison thought she was putting me in my place, but she was actually setting me free. The family who believed I would disappear without a trace had instead disappeared from my life, while I flourished in ways they never could have imagined. I learned that our worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it, and that walking away from cruelty is not weakness, but wisdom. Some challenges are gifts in disguise, and some disappearances are actually the beginning of becoming visible to yourself for the very first time. Have you ever had someone challenge your worth only to discover they were actually challenging you to find your strength? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about times when cruel words became unexpected catalysts for positive change in your life. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding courage in difficult moments. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder that their worth is not determined by other people's inability to see it, and remember that sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply building a beautiful life without the people who cannot appreciate you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to never settle for relationships that diminish your light.